this is an example I had. So let's say the task is learning to throw a ball. And I am basically throwing a ball, and that's what I'm learning how to do. And what is associated in the nervous system is basically, for example, this force parameter, how much force I need to generate to be able to achieve a certain distance. So I'm throwing to someone who's out at 30 feet, then comes into 1 foot, 15 feet, 25 feet. I'm basically throwing the ball at varying forces to achieve a certain distance. The idea is that by practicing under variable conditions, what I established is a general rule between these two parameters, force and distance. And I may never have practiced at 10 feet, but I don't have to have practice at that condition because I just basically pull out my rule. So that's where I can transfer to more novel conditions. What you see in the literature is that, again, if you're comparing variable and constant practice, the people that practice one set of, like they're practicing one trajectory over and over and over and over again, they get really good at it. And they actually, you'll see that their performance improvement is better than the variable group that's kind of all over the place. But when you bring them back and you actually looking at what they retained permanently, changes, that are more permanent changes in their behavior, that's learning. Not those performance changes that may be temporary and dissipate, but what's learned permanently, the variable practice group always does better in every study that has looked at this parameter. So this seems to be a fairly straightforward question, right? What could I do in a VR environment to modify variability? Any ideas?
What can we change?
Well, you can change the environment that they're walking in, and that could be all sorts of things. It could be city versus country versus walking on a path versus walking on something that looks more concrete. You can change the obstacles that are in the way. You can change the way that the path curves. There's all sorts of stuff you could do.
I think I focus more, when I think about the variability parameter in motor learning, I think I focus more on the obstacle change, because we're talking about a task and basically scaling up and down on that same task. So higher obstacles, lower obstacles, changing temporally, where they occur. I think that idea of really looking at variability in practice and utilizing that motor learning practice variable in a virtual environment would be such an easy thing to reproduce or to employ that.
But for us, we can think of it backwards as a context, like skipping on stones, versus jumping over obstacles. There's different kinds of obstacles that could be, real objects or sort of, strange things. Exactly. Monsters, or, that you have to.
Yeah, maybe you have to jump onto the monsters.
Or you have to go step onto the turtles. I mean, there's just so many, creatively, there's so many things you can do if you just think about this variability that's changing both, visually, contextually, speed, repetition, frequency, all those things together.
And what's really wonderful about the motor learning literature is that a lot of these things sometimes are counterintuitive.
Yeah.
As a therapist, I would think, man, if I could just get someone to repeat that same constant situation 500 times, they're really going to learn it. And the motor learning literature, you start to realize that it's the opposite. It's actually it's usually the situation that requires someone to process more information that ends up promoting long-term retention. Whereas in constant practice, you may just be pulling up the same solution over and over and over again, and you're not really we're not modifying the brain likely, and we're not seeing long-term changes.
If we had an example where you're just stepping on turtles and just place a turtle on a linear path, that would not be as effective, presumably, as turtle, right? So we could, there could just be also bad design that only helps a little bit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the kind of stuff that we will, hypothesize like a number of different ways, and then try to, prototype and see what it feels like, right? So we have to make some, speculative designs initially and say, okay, what do we think this might accomplish versus that, and then try to execute some of them. And we will have a lot of questions about this, because, for example, you might think that consistency and repetition, like you said, is what makes you better, but unfortunately it's the variability, and that is totally counterintuitive, because introducing a new variable, you have to make a new connection, really,
Well,
for
that's what
that.
makes it generalizable.
Yes.
Right.
So it does
Right.
Yes.
Right. But it's interesting. The more challenging situations seem to be better for long-term retention. But
Yeah.
one of the things I love about this study as well is this idea of the stakeholders and getting input from people with Parkinson's disease, actually, like, is this working for you? And so I think that is also a really unique part of it. Why haven't we done that before in the Parkinson's disease world?
A number of really interesting questions about how do you do design. Some expertise here, but how do you design for these types of populations? Right? What are the characteristics of your population that you have to take into account? You can't just so there. One approach to sort of gamifying rehabilitation is just to take off-the-shelf games and put them in the money. And in some contexts that might work because the games, there's a lot of investment, so they're very engaging, but the speed of the gameplay might be way too fast for older adults or something. So that doesn't always work. So I think one of the great things about this course is thinking about is addressing those issues.
Yeah.
What are the barriers for this population? How do you get around those barriers
And you
take advantage of
still have a minimum, because we assume that we need to put them on a treadmill, but maybe that's kind of really the next step. Maybe actually you need an environment where people just have to habituate to some aspects of navigating the environment, and also whatever, story, context, affordances, all the ambient stuff, before you can ask them to start running, right? Because VR is a black box. Like, you can't just put the thing on and then just shove them and run. Like, it might be challenging, but it is slightly problematic unless you're dealing with mice. Like, I have issues with that. But then, how do you deal with balance also tells you about what might be the kind of baseline population that we're working with. And if we have people that are constantly falling, we're going to deal with them differently than those that generally are not at risk of falling and they're fairly good walkers, right? So it will get very interesting pretty fast. But typically what we do is we bring people in that are very heterogeneous and actually just have them try off-the-shelf stuff. So, and we can do that at your lab for safety for the people that might be at risk for falling. So come, set up everything, and download a bunch of titles and just ask people to do different stuff, and just then talk to them and observe them, because they will behave differently and we're not used to observation of movement.
I mean, there's a mounting evidence that self-efficacy has a huge role in everybody's motor performance, but in Parkinson's disease in particular. Like, low self-efficacy predicts motor performance or commitment to an exercise program. So if people feel like they're unable to accomplish something, or changing that is going to hugely impact how they do.
Yeah. So we have run out of time, but this was a great kind of cliffhanger for us.